Mishcon Academy digital sessions.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Mishcon Academy session. I'm Nicola Simmons and I will be hosting today's event. I have the pleasure of being in conversation with Swedish sociologist Marie Bergström. She specialises in the study of online dating, and that research has led her to recently publish the wonderful book. What was it that ignited your interest in the social impact of online dating?
Online dating started for me as a master thesis that went into being a PhD thesis. So it's one of my main topics. And so I started studying this in 2007. So it's been some time now. And like what I'm interested in, seeing how this new practice that went really big, how it's evolving and what it's changing. And well, in the beginning, actually, what I was interested in when I started thinking about going into a PhD was more questions about intimacy, about love, about sex, and how our intimate lives are changing, and also about gender differences in those domains, meaning that women and men don't necessarily have the same aspiration, not necessarily the same expectation, etc. So that was really my main research interest at the time. So I wasn't really interested in the beginning in digital technology. My entry to the topic was more in the domain of the changes in intimacy. And it was actually my supervisor who suggested that I look at online dating, and I wasn't necessarily thrilled in the beginning. I think in 2007, online dating had a bad reputation. There was a lot of taboo around it. And I think it's quite possible that I shared some of those preconceived ideas. And I had to think a little bit about it, but I ended up doing it. I ended up making it my main topic of research because I understood quite quickly, I think online dating sites are really good observation sites if you want to understand how love has changed, how sex has changed, how gender relations has changed. And so I thought that by looking on online dating, I would find answers to some of these bigger questions that I was interested in. So that's kind of how it all started.
As your research revealed, for want of a better phrase, arranged dating has changed completely throughout the years. Even way before 15 years ago. It started from things like debutante balls, and that's gone to 5-minute speed dating events, or personal ads to dating agencies. And unfortunately, there's a big program at the moment so that people may be watching. That's a very popular dating show. And so dating has changed completely. Why do you think dating became so big when it went online and specifically transitioned into dating apps themselves?
I think you're right to point out that it's a kind of a long history. Like, of course, online dating is new, right? Because it's a digital service. So like the first online dating service that went online was actually Match, that you might know of. It's so well known today, and it went online in 95. Then you had the dating apps, as you say, that came around. Grindr for gay men was launched in 2009. Tinder was launched in 2012. So that's a recent history, but it's true that online dating has a longer history. As you say, we have matrimonial agency, personal ads that exist since at least the 19th century. And so in that sense, you could say arranged dating or mediated dating or dating services, they're not new per se, but you're right to point out that what is really new is that it became so big, because what we know from surveys, for example, is that using personal ads, for example, was never a big thing. It never made it to the big public. They were around for 150 years. They are still around, but there are really few people using these types of services, whereas online dating really became, we can go back to talk about that later, but it's really a lot of people using these platforms. So why did it become big? Why was there a success, whereas older forms of mediated dating had been more of a failure. Part of the answer is the digital form. I think the fact that it was an internet-based service made it more conceivable and acceptable for certain people. But I think that's really just part of the answer. I think really the main reasons why online dating became big is because of broader transformations in our intimate lives. And when I say that, I think about two things that are really big changes. The first one is among young people. So what we see over the last decades is that young people are settling down at later ages. And before they do, they have a lot of, different types of relationships. You have hookups, you have one-night stands, you have all of these, this type of sexual experimentation that has become really important. And it's really what characterizes youth now. This is this idea that you need to enjoy youth, take advantage of it, shouldn't settle down too early and so on. And actually online dating platforms lend themselves really well to that type of sexual experimentation, because you have a place where there's lots of singles, but also it's, people don't have to know about you going online, like dating, flirting. And so you can experiment, but with a lot of privacy. And a lot of young people appreciate that. And then if you move up the age ladder, so to say, when you look at people who are 30, 40, 50, what we see is that we have a really dramatic increase of separation and divorce, which means that people are, they're single when they're young and they become single again. But when you're 40, 50, it's not that easy to meet new people. And the platforms, they make it possible to meet people who are outside of your social circles, new people. And they have become very, very popular among separated people for repartnering. That if we want to understand why this became big, we can't just focus on the digital part. It's really, I think we really need to take into account the fact that we have these two huge transformations: sexual youth or sexual experimentation during youth, and separation rates that went up. And I think that's really the main factor.
Online dating was traditionally viewed quite negatively. And in your book, you broadly conclude that, and I think you're probably right, that might have been because of the shock and discomfort that people reacted to people basically saying, I want X, X, and X in a partner, so bluntly. But now, given that it's so popular, do you think society's view of online dating has improved?
I think the image of online dating has definitely changed a lot. With the increase of the usage, it's become more socially accepted, and there's less negative reputation. I think that everyone kind of came to understand, or a lot of people came to understand that, it's not only desperate people or losers who use these platforms, because that was the image in the beginning. But I think there's still a lot of critique against these platforms, and I think it has to do with how it kind of clashes. It clashes with our representations and the way we depict love and intimate encounters. And I think, some of these ideals are, strong and still there. The first romantic ideal that these platforms clash with, and which I think is a reason why they have a bad reputation, is that, there's this idea that love is about fate. And of course, online dating doesn't really work with that idea, because you go online, you're searching for someone and putting criteria. So it doesn't fit at all with the way that we like to represent love. And there's another idea that's still quite strong, that is the idea that, love is blind. So the fact that you could fall in love with people independently of their social characteristics. And of course, that too, is difficult to maintain with online dating. And so, these are kind of like myths, or it's ideals, and we somehow know that they're not true, because, love has never been blind. It hasn't been about fate either. I think we do know that it's not really a realistic depiction of love, but we really, really stick to these figures, and we are still very fond of, the idea of a romantic meeting and a romantic encounter. The platforms have a better reputation today, and I think the worst images of people being desperate or being kind of like the outcast of dating, because that was the idea, you go online if you can't find someone. Those have, I think, disappeared, but we still hear a lot of criticism and there's a lot of debate about these platforms, because I think they don't match with our ways of thinking and talking and representing love.
Getting on to like the main principle of your book, because as you can probably see, and I'll zoom in, the underline of your book is online dating and the privatization of intimacy. So your main observation is that online dating has privatized intimacy. What do you mean by privatization?
So what I mean is that with this word, I'm trying to express what is, according to me, the big historical change with online dating, which is not what we have been, I think, saying before. I think what is new with online dating lies elsewhere than in the digital part or in the commodification or other types of theses that they exist on the topic. So by privatization, what I mean is that for the first time, we now have platforms where you meet people outside of your social circle. So that is really new, because if you look at it from a historical perspective, in the Western world, there has never been a place that has been wholly allotted to matching and meeting partners. We have always met partners in our immediate surrounding. These platforms that are, specifically and explicitly dedicated for meeting partners. Dating has its own place and time. And so we go there and we meet people that we don't know from elsewhere. We're not linked to them in any way. It's not a colleague, it's not a friend's friend. And that makes dating private in the sense that these platforms are very insular. They are disconnected from the rest of our social life. But it's also private in the sense that when you do that, you meet people online and your friends and family don't necessarily know about it because there's no one there to watch the scene. On the internet, no one knows you have a date. If you don't tell them, of course you can tell them, but if you want to keep it secret, you can meet people without anyone knowing about it. And all of this is very different from traditional meeting venues, where you meet partners through your friends and family, and you might meet someone at a bar and your friends are around and everyone see what's going on. And I think that privatization, which is another way of saying that before this social sphere and the sexual sphere used to overlap, now we have disconnected them, and it means that there's less social control over what we do and who we meet, so to say. And I think that is a huge break, a huge change in the way intimacy is organized, and that's what I mean by privatization. And so I think it's really important to understand also why online dating have become big. And I think it has really big consequences for the type of relationships we have. And I think the fact that there's a lot of casual dating going on, it's partly explained by that, because you engage, but you also disengage much easily with people you do not know, and you don't have to see them again. And so, it becomes more private, and means that, you can also, there's less social consequences. And that's a really, really big difference.
We're just thinking about what's next for you. Is there an even newer Laws of Love coming up?
I think I'm going to continue to look at online dating. So as I said, I started in 2007. I do have other research topics as well, but I think I will continue to follow up on this, because I think it's gonna change. It's evolving, and so I'm interested in seeing how it's gonna change, and also the long-term effects, because if you want to see what consequences this has, sometimes you need to wait a little bit. You need to see, these couples who are formed, you need to wait a bit to see, to really be able to see, are they as long lasting or are they not? So there's quite, some patience to have, and I'm actually quite happy to continue with that. And on the side now, I'm a sociologist, and I work at the Demographic Institute, and we're now working also on sexual health and sexual lives among young people. So that's another research project looking into young people's new relationships, their hookups and other types of relationships that are more and more common among young people, and trying to understand, what that changes in their life and what it has also as long-term consequences.
We've had one more Q&A. In researching the idea of limbic capitalism, the premise that corporate entities such as Match.com create habit-forming behaviour. I'm curious to know if you think dating apps are keen to match people, or are they actually more interested in just retaining your attention?
Well, I think that's a really good question, because it's a question about the economic and the business model behind these apps and sites. And I think, there's a lot of people saying that, these platforms, it's not in their interest that someone that they meet their partner, because they want to keep people on the platform.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't think that's what the business model builds on, because the thing is that if you have a product that's made for something and this is not working, word's gonna have it, and it's gonna spread that it's not working. So I think that's actually bad for the enterprise and the sector as a whole. And they're quite explicit about this in their business plans. It's not in their interest that nobody meets, nobody. They want people to meet someone, but they also know that relationships break up. And when they do, they want people to come back. And I think that's a very classic business, economic model, having people, be, customers that they don't, stay with the brand immediately, and then they buy new products immediately, but they buy the product, and when they need to renew, they go back. So it's kind of making clients stick in the long term, and dating sites and app really work that way.
Well, I really enjoyed your book, and this has been an absolutely lovely conversation. So thank you so much for your time, Marie.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
In the meantime, I hope you've all enjoyed our conversation, and thank you again, Marie, for your wonderful insight into a really interesting topic that's only going to get more interesting, I can imagine.
Thank you.
The Mishcon Academy Digital Sessions. To access advice for businesses that is regularly updated, please visit mishcon.com.